The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 47. In Diagon Alley. Over the next week, time dragged as he waited for his chance to see his witch. Draco thought more about his experience at Riddle House now that he had time to look back on it with more clarity. He had decided that his earlier assessment about the strength of Voldemort's magic was right. As much as the wizard was feared, he did not seem as strong as he apparently had been at one time. But it seemed that his strength was rebuilding. The wizard he'd first met some weeks ago likely wouldn't have been able to cast the Dark Mark branding spell as easily as he had on August 11th. And what was that bit about getting help from some of the other Death Eaters? There was no way that Dumbledore, or the Aurors, or other professors would allow Death Eaters into the castle, by flue, gate, or broom. It was impossible to apparate in or out within the grounds, and Draco had no idea how to go about creating a portkey. What other possible way did he have to get anyone inside? He was lying back on his bed, pondering this very question for the 16th time that day, staring lazily at the open wardrobe across from the foot of his bed. Inside hung his Quidditch kit, and stuck up on the door with a permanent sticking charm were handfuls of team photos from over the years. There was a team photo of his second squad from his third year. Flint, a hardened look in his eye, likely pissed off because they had only just missed winning the Quidditch Cup. Derek and Bowl, looking a bit confounded about why they were there. Warrington, his handsome features twisted in a smirk. Bletchley, who seemed surprised to have made the squad. And Montague, large smile, oblivious to what was going to happen to him in a couple of years. Last he'd heard, Montague was being taken care of round the clock by Mediwitches at his home, all because he couldn't stop nattering on about the two identical imps that shut him into a cabinet that he couldn't escape, spending vast amounts of time floating between two planes of existence, one a shop of some sort and the other a collection of forgotten junk. The way Montague described that cabinet, it almost sounded like this wardrobe in front of him. Draco shuddered to imagine being stuck inside such a place for months on end. And yet, Montague's imagination had made him fabricate a shop full of dark artifacts. This, above all things, seemed odd. It was one thing to imagine skittering creatures, haunting bits of music, broken magical toys. It was entirely another to fantasize about transactions in a shop. Draco sat up suddenly. He had been in a shop like the one Montague had described. A shop that sold things like cursed necklaces, poisonous candles, biting tea kettles. A shop where men might discuss dark artifacts. It seemed as though he had more than one objective in going to Diagon Alley next week. He would need to stop by Borgin and Burke's as well. But what of the other things? The skittering creatures and broken toys? The ghost's words came back to him. "Ah, yes, I recall that cabinet. I believe Mr. Filch put it in the room of hidden things." What was this room of hidden things at Hogwarts? He thought a moment before realization dawned. He whispered a name into the air. "Dobby?" The elf popped in, standing on his bed, and looked at Draco with a helpful smile. "Dobby, you know the Room of Requirement, right? How it can become other things, other places, depending on the needs of the user." "Yes, Draco Malfoy?" Diagon Alley was eerily quiet when he and his mother stepped out the back door of the leaky cauldron, into which they'd flued. This solemnity was unexpected. Draco had hoped to have the cover of crowds from which to watch his witch. Now he and his mother would be out in the open. "What do you need first, my dragon? New robes, perhaps? Or your favourite strawberry ice cream?" Narcissa smiled fondly at him. She hefted the ugly handbag containing Peter Pettigrew onto her other arm. For a rat, he was quite heavy. When she had announced at breakfast that she and Draco were going to Diagon Alley for school shopping, Pettigrew had insisted upon coming along in his animagus form. Draco had tried to go back into his room to send a message of warning to Hermione that Peter would be with them. He gave Pettigrew the excuse of supposedly getting a lighter cloak, but Pettigrew told him to simply summon it. Draco assumed that the balding wizard had orders not to let him out of their sight when they left the house. Draco smiled back at his mother, knowing that, truly, the ice cream parlor was Narcissa's favorite stop in this wizarding neighborhood. If they were out together, they might as well enjoy themselves a bit. Pettigrew's presence be damned. They turned up the street, heading towards the bright yellow umbrellas that covered the cafe tables outside of Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. As they neared the spot, however, it became clear that something was wrong. About half of the umbrellas were missing, and a third of the tables lay on their sides on the curb. The door to the ice cream parlor, normally thrown wide to welcome in foot traffic, was boarded up, the windows papered over with ministry warnings and notices of escaped prisoners. "Where is Florian?" Narcissa sounded as though she was near tears. "I don't know," Draco said lamely. He chanced a look at his mother. Her look of agony far exceeded that of someone who wanted a cup of melon sorbet. She looked at him, grimacing, and shook her head slightly. "No, don't ask me about it." "Well," said Narcissa, with forced brightness in her voice, "let us go and check on those robes, Madame Malkin's." They strode arm in arm up the street, pausing occasionally to look in a shop window. Aelop's Owl Emporium had a small trickle of customers, and the apothecary was quite busy. Draco tried not to draw attention to the fact that Narcissa was stifling a bit, commenting on the items in the windows as they passed. They passed the entrance to Nocturne Alley without a mention of it. He knew that he needed to find a way to Borgin and Burke's before they left, but the idea of going there, really of what he needed to do in there, made his stomach knot. Madame Malkin's was empty of customers when they opened the door, the bell tinkling overhead to alert the owner of entering customers. "Oh, Mrs. Malfoy, how may I help you today?" The shop proprietor was a bit more clipped and formal with her words than she typically was with Narcissa. Lucius's imprisonment had set them back socially, to be sure. "My son Draco is starting his 6th year at Hogwarts. As the Quidditch captain and a prefect, new robes are a must." "Of course, right this way." The grey-haired witch pointed, leading them to a display of ornate wizard's robes. Narcissa followed, Pettigrew's bag on her arm. Slight movement on the street outside caused Draco to turn and peer out the windows. Hermione, surrounded by a large herd of Weasleys, Hagrid, and the truly ridiculous hair of Potter, stood on the street about 7 doors down. He looked back at his mother and the shop owner, who were talking animatedly over the various dress robes on display. Taking a chance, Draco removed his handkerchief from his robe pocket and said, "Vinca Major. We are in Diagon Alley at Madame Malkin's, but we have Pettigrew with us. He can hear everything we're saying. When we meet, I'm going to try to pick a fight with Potter and the Weasleys. My mother will likely defend me if they fight back. Maybe everyone else will get distracted, and we can have a moment alone." He hoped that she understood. If they encountered each other, both of them would need to play their parts to make the moment convincing. As he watched through the window, Hermione took out the handkerchief from her cuff, unfolding it and pretending to wipe the late summer heat from her brow as her lips moved minutely. Then she opened the handkerchief, and in his pocket he felt his own handkerchief cool. She replaced the handkerchief, turning distractedly back to the others. The group split in half, with the Weasley parents and the youngest Weaselette going in one direction, whilst Hermione, Hagrid, and the 2 doofuses marched their direction.
"Draco, come and look at this one. See if you like it."
Draco took off the robe he'd worn into the shop and slipped on the new one, and inspiration struck. Perhaps his mother could stay and pick out the robes with Pettigrew, and he could make the excuse of getting done faster by going alone to select the special arithmancy parchment at Dervish and Bangs. He could run into the fearless foursome outside, and perhaps Hermione would remember that she needed the same parchment. He wasn't sure if Potter and Weasley would let her go alone, but he would love to see them try and stop her. "Mother, why don't you stay and select some new robes? I'll just go ahead to the next shop so we can get done faster." Narcissa's eyes widened. "No, my dragon, I don't think that's the best idea." Draco knew that she likely did not want to be left alone in public with Peter, and he felt a bit guilty for even asking. But he really wanted the chance to speak to Hermione. The shop doorbell tinkled behind them. "I'm not a child, in case you haven't noticed, Mother. I am perfectly capable of doing my shopping alone." "Now, dear, your mother's quite right. None of us is supposed to go wandering around on our own any more. It's nothing to do with being a child." Madame Malkin was bustling around him now, pinning up the cuffs of his robe. She bloused out the left sleeve, turning it under a bit far to locate the crease she'd already started, jabbing her pins into the excess fabric above the fold. "Watch where you're sticking that pin, will you?" he hissed, as the tip of one of the pins grazed against the tender, reddened flesh on his arm. Blinking back a small tear of pain, he walked to the mirror to look at the robe, but really was hoping to see out of the windows in case Hermione had gone into a nearby shop. The three of them were standing only 15 feet away, nearly directly behind him. Hermione wore a blue muggle sundress with little white squares dotting the fabric. Her hair was braided to one side, and on the other side of her head was nestled the sapphire and pearl barrette. She smiled slightly at him, eyes sparkling just a bit. In contrast, the Wonder Boys had their wands drawn, eyes narrowed at him menacingly. "If you're wondering what the smell is, Mother, a mudblood just walked in," said Draco loudly. He knew his mother would want to know that Potter had entered, and he wanted her to know that Hermione was with Potter. It was unfortunate that letting her know also let Pettigrew know. "I don't think there's any need for language like that," said Madame Malkin, hurrying up beside him, looking at the two wizards who had just entered. "And I don't want wands drawn in my shop either." "No, don't, honestly, it's not worth it," Hermione said quietly, and Draco knew that she meant his plan of creating an argument between his mother and Potter. He turned to the other wizard. "Yeah, like you dare do magic out of school," he jeered at Potter. Now that they were closer, he took a better look at Hermione and was incensed to see that she had bruises on her face, carefully covered with muggle makeup. What the fuck had happened at the Weasley house? Was this family of wizard buffoons so ornery that they'd resorted to fist fights to entertain themselves? Or had she met with something more sinister? "Who blacked your eye, Granger? I want to send them—" my fist to their face. "Flowers." He locked eyes with her, widening them slightly in question, and tilted his head. She smiled a bit and shook her head, as if to indicate that it was nothing. Still, the instinct to protect his witch from harm had riled Draco up. "That's quite enough," interrupted Madame Malkin. She turned to Narcissa. "Madam, please." His mother stood, hoisting the ugly bag in front of her. "Put those away. If you attack my son again, I shall ensure that it is the last thing you ever do." Narcissa looked at the two wizards with wands drawn appraisingly. Apparently, he wasn't the only Malfoy with a protective streak. Potter was clearly spoiling for a fight. "Really? Going to get a few Death Eater pals to do us in, are you?" From next to him, Madame Malkin made a noise like a rat being eaten by a gneasel. "Really, you shouldn't accuse. That's a dangerous thing to say. Wands away, please." The elderly witch gestured to their wands with an air of authority, as though she herself had not insulted Narcissa only a few minutes before. Narcissa smiled tightly. "I see that being Dumbledore's favourite has given you a false sense of security, Harry Potter. But Dumbledore won't always be there to protect you." Potter looked around comically. "Wow, look at that. He's not here now. So, why not have a go? They might be able to find you a double cell in Azkaban, with your loser of a husband." Draco was outraged, even as a very small part of him was slightly impressed at the bollocks of this idiot. He stepped towards Potter, off of the platform in front of the mirror, catching the long hem of the robes he was wearing and stumbling a bit. The weasel sputtered in laughter. "Don't you dare talk to my mother like that, Potter!" he spat. "It's all right, Draco," said Narcissa, placing a calming hand on his shoulder. "I expect Potter will be reunited with dear Sirius before I am reunited with Lucius." It was a low blow. Even Draco could see that. So much for Potter and his mother being a satisfactory distraction. From the looks of it, Potter was going to be back in another hearing for underage magic soon. "Harry, no!" said Hermione, pulling the daft wizard's arm down. "Think, you mustn't. You'd be in such trouble." Madame Malkin apparently felt as Draco did, that Hermione's word on the subject was final. "I think this left sleeve could come up a little bit more, dear. Let me just— Ouch!" bellowed Malfoy, slapping at her as she jabbed yet another pin into his dark mark. "What were you putting your pins, woman?" He turned to his mother and widened his eyes, looking sidelong at his left arm to indicate the problem. "Mother, I don't think I want these any more." He pulled the robes over his head and they fell to the floor at Madame Malkin's feet. "You're right, Draco," said Narcissa, who stared down her nose at Weasley. "Now that I know the kind of scum that shops here, we'll do better at Twilfit and Tattings." They exited quickly, Draco being sure to shoulder-check Weasley on the way out. The stupid tosser couldn't even be bothered to come to his two friends' defense. He'd just stood there like a wart on a toad, and let his friends be insulted. What an absolute wanker. He and Narcissa made their way up the street, stopping in at the apothecary for potions ingredients, and the Owl Emporium for treats for Thorn and Colwyn. He noticed with some horror that Ollivander's was closed, boarded up as well. That did not bode well. Where would people get wands? He did not bring up the shop's closure to his mother's attention. She did not need that right now. Up ahead, he saw her favourite tea shop and turned towards it. They were soon seated in Lady Erley's tea cosy for tea and sandwiches. Narcissa had found a few friends, Carys Flint, Margaret Macmillan, and Lachlan Bletchley, to distract her. Draco, now desperate for at least one of his plans to work, whether it was seeing Hermione or going to Borgin and Burke's investigating this thing, stood. "Mother, I believe I left my wand on that table at Madame Malkin's. It was behind those flowers, so I didn't notice it when we left. I'll be right back." Before his mother could object or stop him, he swept from the little cafe, out of the front door, and back down the street. Looking in the windows of the robe shop, he could see that she and her friends had moved on. He looked into the windows of the Owl Emporium and Apothecary, Flourish and Blots and Dervish and Bangs, with no luck. One of the last shops on the street, in contrast to all of the others, appeared to be doing a roaring trade in merchandise, whereas the rest of the shop windows were drab and dark, some papered over. These windows sparkled with magic, the purple and orange lights from within enticing customers. Draco stopped and stared. This was the infamous Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, the joke shop of Fred and George Weasley. Outside the shop, marionette-looking statues of the two young wizards, identical to the very last, rose high above the entrance. The two marionettes took turns doffing hats to passers-by, impish grins upon their faces. 2 identical imps. With a jolt of realization, Draco suddenly knew which task was more important today. As much as he wanted to see Hermione, if she was in that shop, she was surrounded by Weasleys. There would be no moment of privacy for the two of them, no matter what. He turned, looking furtively up and down the street around him, making sure that his mother had not freed herself from the confines of Lady Everleigh's and her friends. Then he set off at a brisk pace to Knockturn Alley. Chapter 48. The Shopkeepers' Stories. Borgin and Burke's was just as dark and empty as the rest of the shops in Knockturn Alley, and half of those in Diagon Alley. The only difference was, the little shop was still open for business. He entered, finding the greasy, slicked-back hair of Borgin himself bent over a ledger at the counter. The room was overshadowed by a large black cabinet in the centre of the space. This must be similar to the cabinet that Montague found himself in, but how had he possibly been here? "Mr. Malfoy!" Borgin looked up, fixing him with a look as though Draco was something particularly disgusting stuck to the bottom of his boot. "What a very great pleasure." "I know it must be," Draco drawled. "Listen, I've got some questions about this cabinet." "What is it?" This is a vanishing cabinet." Borgin said it as though it was incredibly obvious. At Draco's look of confusion, he continued, "Allow me to explain. Say that you have enemies. You need to make a quick getaway, but you don't know how to operate. Or perhaps there are wards in place that prevent apparition. You want it to be untraceable, so you don't want to use a flue, which is regulated by the Ministry. Or perhaps you simply don't have a flue connected. But you have this. You can just step into the cabinet and go." "Go?" Draco asked. "Go where?" "Well, it would depend. Some early or primitive versions would just be luck of the draw. They might be connected to any random bit of furniture, anywhere, so long as the magical signatures of the wood used to make the two furniture pieces were compatible. You might end up in an altar at a convent in Palma de Mallorca, or inside of an outhouse on the Texas plain. But for the discriminating witch or wizard, it was preferential to have one cabinet in one place and another matching cabinet in a second secure location. That way, when the hordes were at your door, you could make an escape and guarantee that you ended up where you intended, and not facing a glory hole in the stall of a pub toilet in Prague." "What is a glory hole? Is that similar to my Hand of Glory?" Draco furrowed his brow, recalling the unique artifact that his father had purchased for him several years before. Borgin eyed him beadily. "It is not." Draco waited a moment, but Borgin seemed unwilling to elaborate on what a glory hole actually was. "Never mind, then. Let's just get back to it. So, this cabinet, I assume it is one of the latter types, the ones that are part of a set?" Draco asked. "These two cabinets were owned by a former headmaster of Hogwarts many years ago. Perhaps you've read his name in the annals of your own family's genealogical records. Your great-great-great-grandfather, Phineas Nigellus Black." Borgin sneered at him. "He was an unpopular professor, and as headmaster during the Goblin Rebellion in the 1890s, he felt it imprudent to have a means of escape from Hogwarts. When he passed away sometime in the 1920s, several of his heirlooms were lost to his son's debauchery, gambling, illicit potions, philandering, and such. This cabinet came into our possession several years ago." But the matching cabinet, the one presumably still at Hogwarts, something was wrong with it. It was no longer placed out in the open for anyone with the know-how to use. It had been put away somewhere else after Peeves dropped it, according to the Gryffindor ghost. The room of Broken toys, strange creatures, malfunctioning Victrolas. It must be broken as well. That's why Montague couldn't get out. The tunnel was open, but incompletely so. At times, Montague had been here in this dark and foreboding shop, unable to open the door and step out. At other times he had been... where? In the passage between? In the room of hidden things? Where had he been when the room was changed to something different? Draco inwardly shuddered to think of the unusual possibilities of dimension, time, and space. And how do the two cabinets work? Do they form some kind of tunnel?
To be honest, I'm uncertain, sir,
Borgin said, the last word with more than a little disdain.
I believe it is much like a flu, and that the travel is somewhat quick, though perhaps not instantaneous, but instead of flu powder to initiate the movement, an incantation is used.
I see. I believe that the twin of this cabinet is damaged. Do you know how to fix it?
Possibly. I'll need to see it, though. Why don't you bring it into the shop?
Borgin asked smoothly. I can't. It's got to stay put. I just need you to tell me how to do it. Draco was certain that if he somehow managed to get the other cabinet out of Hogwarts Castle, there was no way it was going back in.
Well, without seeing it, I must say it will be a very difficult job. Perhaps impossible. I couldn't guarantee anything.
Borgin gave him a look as if to say, I don't wish to help you, and there's nothing you can do about it. No, Draco said, growing angry. Now appeared to be the time to play his trump card. Perhaps this will make you more confident. He drew up his sleeve, brandishing the reddened and angry-looking dark mark that was embedded in his skin. Tell anyone, and there will be retribution. You know Fenrir Greyback. He's an old family friend. He'll be dropping in from time to time to make sure you're giving this problem your full attention, Draco said quietly. He recalled the disgusting man who visited the manor early in the summer. The name appeared in the Daily Prophet often, and he seemed to be quite feared. If the dark mark and Greyback's name didn't convince Borgin, nothing would.
There will be no need for...
I'll decide that, he said sharply. Well, I'd better be off. And don't forget to keep that one safe. I'll need it.
Perhaps you'd like to take it now?
Borgin asked quickly, clearly wanting to be well shot of this whole situation. No, of course I wouldn't, you stupid little man. How would I look carrying that down the street? Just don't sell it. Draco shook his head in disbelief.
Of course not, sir.
The older man gave a small bow. Borgin's tone was less cordial now, but was more respectful, deferential. Draco felt slightly repulsed with himself to realize that the respect had come from fear. Who was he to be feared? He was just some stupid, scared 16-year-old. Not a word to anyone, Borgin. And that includes my mother, understand? Especially his mother. If she knew what he was doing right now, intimidating a shopkeeper, planning an invasion at his school, contemplating murder, she would never look at him the same way. Because now Draco saw a possibility. This was the way into Hogwarts. This was the way to bring backup. People that could complete this impossible and ridiculous mission that he had been set upon. Surely it mattered not who completed the mission, so long as it was done. Draco did not want to kill Dumbledore, but his own memories held a lot of secrets. His mother, placing Peter's bag knowingly with his items on platform 9 3/4, contacting her banished sister, or telling him to contact the Order about Creature's betrayal and Bellatrix's possible escape. Blaise, telling him that he and Theo did not subscribe to this pureblood nonsense, visiting a witch that had fought against Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries. Professor Snape giving him murtlap tentacles, teaching him occlumency, rushing into the forest after Hermione and Potter. Dobby taking warning messages to Potter and the others about Umbridge's approach, telling him he wasn't a bad wizard. Hermione telling him that she loved him. He did not want to kill Dumbledore, but if given the choice between the old wizard and his own mother, Hermione, his friends, Snape, possibly even Potter, he felt sure that even Dumbledore would understand. Draco only hoped that one day soon he would understand as well. That night, back at the manor, Narcissa joined him again in his room, turning up the quiet music that played over the wireless, and casting wards and a muffling charm for good measure. She had covered for him when he returned to Lady Everleigh's, praising him for purchasing the rest of his supplies whilst he was gone, even though he had done no such thing. He was certain that she planned to discreetly purchase them the following day by owl. But tonight she was angry and fearful, wanting to know where he'd been. "Mother, I told you. There were some things I needed to take care of."
"Draco, if you were meeting with her—"
"I wasn't."
"I was just going to say, if you were meeting with her. I understand it, but it's dangerous."
Narcissa sighed, sitting down on the divan and twisting the fabric of her robes nervously.
"Perhaps you've noticed that the ice cream parlor is closed."
She looked up at him sharply, her face trying hard to mask her emotions.
"What you did not know is that I was very good friends with Florian in our youth. Perhaps more than friends."
His mother reddened slightly.
"But I was a member of the Sacred 28, and there could be no half-blood husband for me. Cygnus would have killed me first. The only way Andromeda escaped was with her wand and the clothes on her back. And even then I knew she was constantly afraid, for a long time, that he would find her and kill her anyway."
Draco was quiet. Suddenly, all the lengthy visits to the ice cream parlor over the years made complete sense. It had always been his mother's first stop in Diagon Alley, and yet always seemed to put his father on edge. Draco had always assumed that this was because Lucius disliked the frivolity of it all, the abundance of choices, the brightly coloured glass dishes and elaborate concoctions, the sweetness and messiness and indulgence of it all. But it was likely merely jealousy. Draco idly wondered for a moment what life would have been like as the son of an ice cream shop owner. Fortescue had always seemed kindly, jovial, an interesting fellow who invented flavours the way other wizards might invent potions or spells. Draco smiled inwardly. One thing was for certain. If he'd been raised by Florian Fortescue, he'd have probably looked a lot more like Vince and Greg. He went to sit by his mother on the divan, holding her hands as she fought not to cry. Narcissa met his eyes gratefully with a tremulous look of appreciation. He took a handkerchief, a different one from the one with which he communicated with Hermione, from his trouser pocket, and offered it to her. She smiled ruefully at him.
"Don't want me using the other one?"
"What other one?" he asked, surprised and a bit defensive.
"Oh, Draco, sweet darling, you're not the first couple of Hogwarts students to come up with a means of private communication. When I was at Hogwarts, several girls had mirrors to speak through, or a charmed notebook."
At Draco's dumbfounded look, Narcissa gave him a watery chuckle.
"No need to look so scandalized, my dragon. Your old mother was young once, too."
"Mum, you're still young." He took her hand carefully. "You know you don't have to stay here. You can go. Escape now. I'll be all right, but I need for you to be safe too. You shouldn't have to be punished for a decision your father made for you when you were 14.
She sighed. "I can't, darling dragon. I took a vow, a marital vow, years ago to stand by your father. Now isn't the time to break it."
Draco hoped that she was leaving unsaid that, whilst now might not be the time, she was leaving the option open in the future. He put his arm around her shoulders as she wiped her fresh tears. "I'm sorry.
about today. I know that must have been difficult."
His mother and his aunt had lived in fear for decades, simply for loving someone different from them. What a horrible, fucked up world they had chosen to live in. Later that night his handkerchief warmed. "We saw you in Borgin and Burke's today. What are you trying to fix there?"
He was trying to fix this fucked up decision he'd made, he thought. Instead, he wrote, "It's a very long story. I don't think I can tell it yet."
She replied, "So, are we starting the year with secrets between us?" He wanted to reply that he couldn't even talk to her about the things that he couldn't talk to her about, but the secrecy bonds prevented the words from even forming silently on his lips. But there was one thing that he could say for sure to her.
"Everything I do, every decision I make, I'm trying to make them with you and your safety in mind. Not all of them are going to be good. I'm sorry in advance."
She did not reply, but Draco had to hope that she could understand, at least a bit. If there was any way to prevent it, he would not wake up one day to learn that the person that he'd loved had vanished. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great78.